Welcome back to Conversations with B'rith. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're speaking with photojournalist and B'rith magazine contributor Marcia Bricker Halperin, who frequently focuses her lens and her pen on subjects like Jewish delis and vanishing neighborhoods and institutions. But first, if you enjoy this series, make sure you subscribe to the B'rith YouTube channel and like us on Facebook to watch all of our latest interviews. And of course, visit our website, b'rith.org, to learn more about our humanitarian and advocacy efforts across the globe. Well, gossip, lipstick, powder puffs, cigars, kerchiefs, fedoras, and leopard pattern coats. Gefilte fish, kasha varnishkes, rice pudding, and blintzes. For a generation of New Yorkers, all this could only mean one thing. You were at a cafeteria, a unique dining establishment that was more than just a place to eat. In fact, one time, cafeterias were the true community centers, especially for Jewish New Yorkers. In her new book, Kibbitz and Nosh, When We All Met at Dubrow's Cafeteria, photographer Marcia Bricker Halperin looks back at a classic slice of New York life, just as it was about to disappear, and reflects on the establishment that helped shape her as a Brooklynite and launched her artistic career. Marcia Bricker Halperin has been photographing the characters and landscapes of New York City for almost 50 years. She received a Master of Fine Arts degree from Brooklyn College. From 1978 to 1980, Marcia was a part of the CETA Artists Project documentation team. Her photography has been included in many group exhibitions, including at the Brooklyn Museum and the International Center of Photography, and is represented in a number of collections. After spending 35 years in K-12 education teaching art and photography and using her creativity in special education with disabled and autistic students, she has begun a deep dive into her photography archives. Marcia, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be speaking to you.
Well, first of all, talk to us about your approach to capturing moments and taking photographs, beginning in the 1970s, that would eventually become part of your recently published photographic monograph, Kibbitz and Nosh, When We All Met at Dubrow's Cafeteria. Now, many of the photos are from the beginning of your career, and I'm assuming that you've acquired a new attachment to them as you look back.
Yes, I protected them well for almost 50 years so that now they could see the light. And while some people still remember Dubrow's, remember cafeterias, and can find their relatives in the pictures. But as a young art student, I found that photography appealed to me. I wasn't that good with a pen and brush, but when I first put a heavy Pentax camera in my hands, that seemed like a better tool than a pencil. And it appealed to me. And then I photographed in my neighborhood till I discovered on a cold day that I needed to go inside Dubrow's Cafeteria to warm up.
Well, the photos in Kibbitz and Nosh were archive pictures, as you note, sort of rediscovery for you. At the time that you created them in the 1970s, did you think about the possibility that they were almost anthropological records, in the sense that they were documenting the end of a way of life for urban Jews? Or were you thinking of establishing your own aesthetic style, as it were, different from that of a peer like, say, Diane Arbus, or from an earlier generation like Helen Levitt, who treated their subjects a little bit different?
So at the time, I had the foresight to keep a journal. I wrote down everyone's names and what happened there. And I found in my journal that I wrote about having them down the line, because I knew these were waning establishments. Some others, all of them in the city, were closing down. By the time in 1974, 75, I was looking in the yellow pages. Oh, there's a cafeteria on some street, and I'd get there and it would be the auction of the pots and all the fittings. So I knew this was something I was capturing that wouldn't be there anymore. And that was the kind of photography that I was studying. I studied with people from the Photo League, and this was the kind of thing that they perpetuated, trying to change the world, show things that were wonderful in the world. Bernice Abbott was all about changing New York. So I knew I was following in that lineage, and that propelled me. I don't know if I really knew what the future would hold.
Oh, I think it's looking back sometimes when we know that something ended at a certain time, you ask yourself, well, I must have known that at the time, but that's not necessarily the case. You don't know when a lease, expired, or when the family who owned the business decided to go out of business. So I get the point, but you certainly captured a very important moment in time. So in your latest work, you forge a very interesting vision that brings together architectural space and the quality of light reflected on glass and metallic surfaces, with studied and contemplative portraits of mostly older people, and the way that they interact, or oftentimes didn't interact. A lot of people sitting at tables by themselves. Would you agree that the spirit and the essence of past experiences of the people in your work in their golden years, so to speak, and their quiet dignity, because I think that comes across in the photos, despite their outdated clothes, perhaps, and efforts to look youthful, are what you really wanted to capture at that moment?
I did want to distinguish my work. I was familiar with the work of Diane Arbus and other street photographers. And of course, I wanted to be unique. I wanted a unique view. So when I went inside Dubrow's and I saw the textures and different elements that could be included in these environmental portraits, I thought that was fabulous. So I would always, when I would be observing around, I'd be saying, oh, look, there's somebody with a reflection. So they're duplicated. Or there's something where their hair is echoed in the shape of the mosaics, kind of, and swirly designs and echoing. So I was very conscious of, artistic things. I had been studying drawing and painting and a lot of art history. That had always been my love. So I was putting these elements together, and I had a captive audience that were sitting there for hours, sometimes whiling their time away. So they weren't alone at home. They were kind of alone in the company of others. And then I became pretty well known. And anytime I'd walk in, everybody wanted their portrait taken. I gave out pictures.
Did you become friends with any of these folks? Were they able to talk to you about their lives, or what they were doing there, spending there, as you say, whiling away their time? Or was this simply, here comes Marcia, I'd like to be photographed? And in their wanting to be photographed, do you think, as is often the case with photography, do you think that there was the issue of perhaps having some immortality as a result of your taking this picture?
Perhaps. I think that they appreciated the attention. They can sit, ordinary people, and here I was taking their pictures. And also, I had many conversations with people. So leading up to a photograph, there might be an hour of hearing very sad stories of their whole life. And then they'd be crying. There was one woman, and she was just, everything she spilled out to me. And then at the end, I said, can I take a portrait of you? And a big smile came across her face. So I did get to know the people. Not so much outside, although in those days I did correspond. I'd send pictures to people. They'd send me typewritten letters recommending photographers to look at. So I did establish a relationship there. I would sit and they'd tell me about the old days and talk about what they were doing, going to Aqueduct Racetrack, shopping.
Well, zooming out for a moment, and we talked about it in the introduction, why did you choose Dubrow's as the driver of your narrative? And just in the interest of full disclosure here, and we talked about it before we went on the program, we lived in New Hampshire, but my parents had lived in Brooklyn for many years before, and I had a favorite aunt and uncle who lived on East 15th Street, equidistant between Avenue M and Kings Highway. And when we would come to New York to visit my aunt and uncle, my dad would always take me down to Dubrow's, the one at Kings Highway, which is right near the subway, the elevated subway stop. And of course, I can picture the tables being filled, and I suppose, conjure up again the aromas of the cafeteria. But why did you choose that, even though they were a disappearing place in New York life, generally speaking? Did you live near there? Did you know about it? Had you heard about it? What's the story behind the choosing Dubrow's?
So, yes, I grew up in what we called it Flatbush back then. Maybe it's Midwood now. But we called it Kings Highway. Yeah, I walked the streets. And so I had this notion to be a street photographer. And as you know, it was this thriving shopping street, store windows. I fashioned myself maybe a little of the French photographer Atget, and I'd go out in the morning and photograph mannequins and things in store windows. So this was going to be my story. The overhead subway station, the elevated train, created a space where there was diffused light. So, and I also felt safe near the subway where people were, and near stores where people. Being a street photographer could be, in 70s New York, could have been a scary thing for a young person like me. So winter came, February, and I'm outside photographing, and I'm holding the camera with ungloved hands, and it was cold. The frost in the windows created these beautiful textures and patterns that rhyme, or whatever you call when it, frost is there. But I never had been in Dubrow's before, and I was so cold that day I had to seek refuge. And it was a transformative moment going through the revolving doors inside, and the space was huge. The ceilings were just, I don't know, 20 or so. When you go back and visit your elementary school, it seems so much smaller. I walked into this place and it was bigger than any other space I'd ever been in. And then, of course, there were all the details and textures. So at first, I just was photographing architectural details. And then little by little, added people into it. And I just started returning. I thought I had a story. I was encouraged, showed the work, a few of the pictures. I was encouraged by great teachers, Walter Rosenblum, Lizette Modell. They said, keep doing this. So I kept going back, and it just blossomed. And then I went to other cafeterias as well. In their last days, a couple of Horn and Hardart automats, and one of my favorites, the Paradise Cafeteria, that was on 23rd and 6th Avenue. But when it came to doing this book, I had a wonderful editor at Cornell University Press, Michael McGandy, who really helped me focus it. And he said that Dubrow's alone was a story. A small restaurant started by a Jewish immigrant family in 1929 on Eastern Parkway, and then it grew into one on Kings Highway, Miami Beach, the Garment District, and so it became a great story, a New York story.
I remember a lot of Formica. That was part of the brand. Kibbitz and Nosh features essays by Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Donna Margulies and acclaimed historian of the Jewish American experience and previous B'nai B'rith guest on our program, Deborah Moore. Why was it so important to contextualize your photographs, and how did you choose who would write the essays?
So during the years that I was teaching, and as the internet, in the 90s started to be the place of research, I started collecting, because I wasn't doing anything with the photographs, but I started collecting every little article and bit of information I could get on cafeterias. I amassed matchbooks and postcards and articles, and then I even interviewed the Dubrow's family and other people who had gone there, older people in Brooklyn. maybe I thought I was going to make a documentary or something with all this information. But as it turned out, after I retired and I went to put the book together with all this information, I needed somebody who could put it together and make it make sense. I'm not a historical writer. And I was incredibly fortunate that when I reached out to Deborah Moore, she agreed to, put it together and write it. And I knew that Donald Margulies grew up in the neighborhood and had also a connection to it. And I was so pleased that he agreed to write an essay of his experience and his memories and his family's connection to it.
Well, Deborah Moore provides a fine introduction to the rise and fall of Dubrow's cafeterias from its heyday as a center of political and social life and as a third space for friendly gatherings. That third space was not only for friendly gatherings, but it was also for individuals who would come in and find that third space to sit, to have a cup of coffee, and to have a nosh to its final decade. And I think the Manhattan location in the Garment District closed, I think, in 1985. Now, at that time, Moore writes, all kinds of changes, from the evolution in culinary preferences, the disappearance of what we might call the lower middle class, to subsequent generations' attitude toward their ethnicity and more, contributed to the demise of the New York cafeteria. And when Deborah Moore was writing this, I mean, did she? How did it work? Did you meet and she looked through all your photos? Did she write this before she saw the photos? How did that? What was the chronology there?
I shared a good deal of the photos. I had put them together to share with the editor, and there are hundreds. So I had to get it down to 150 and then get it down again to less than that. So I shared the images. I think that was the first thing that appealed to her. She has a great love of photography. She herself is becoming now a historian of Jewish American photographers as well, and has a new book about that coming out in the September. And so, yes, first we started with the photos, and then I shared a lot of my information with her, and she really was able to contextualize it with historical things, and also put that framework of what was happening with New York Jews over those years.
Well, now, post Dubrow's, what are you turning your camera to? I mean, you mentioned, for example, you thought for a moment that this might turn into a documentary. I think there is one on Horn and Hardart. I think I saw somewhere. But Dubrow's does deserve, I think, its own special treatment. Are you considering that?
I would be glad to supply all of the bits to make a documentary, but that's a lot to do. And yes, I love the Automat movie. Some of my photographs are in it, showing at the time when there's lone people sitting in these vast cafeterias. So they were used in Lisa Hurwitz's great documentary, real passion project for her.
Well, tell us about your subsequent work in New York as a photojournalist and more. What's on tap?
So I'm mostly looking back through the 50 years of archives. There's so many negatives, so much black and white photography. I've photographed the changes in Hell's Kitchen for years, right in Midtown Manhattan. What used to be it's still a thriving community, but what was a different community of families and people, and the housing issues in that area. I have years and years of photographs of Coney Island and other neighborhoods in Brooklyn. I have pictures of the first Soviet immigrants to Brighton Beach when they arrived. I had an assignment through that Cedar Artist Project where I was trying to show the old Jewish population there, the culture of the new Russians and vice versa. So there's all these photographs. I've been photographing for almost 40 years in Polamoid outings in New York, the intervening days of Passover and Sukkot, where the yeshivas let the students go to all the different places in New York, particularly to the beach in Coney Island. And there's a large body of that work. So over the years, I guess I've found that I have a thread, a Jewish theme of different groups stretching through my work. So I'm putting that together.
Well, Jewish New York has so many different aspects to it. And it sounds, even just from what you're saying, that there's so much there. And in particular, Brooklyn, of all the boroughs, of course, there was the Lower East Side, but then there was Brooklyn. And Brooklyn was unique and remains unique, I think, in American Jewish history, as a place where, I think in 1960, it may have been maybe 35%, but maybe a little bit more Jewish. And so there was so much Jewish life, lower middle class Jewish life, Coney Island, and Dubrow, and of course so many other places. So let us know what's coming next in terms of those Jewish themed ideas that you have. Anything else that you might add about photography, in the sense of, there are so many different subjects. I'm sitting around a table, and I suppose one could photograph the chairs around this particular table and present them as art, depending on how you took the picture. What is it, do you think, about the human condition? Because this is really where you focus. This is, at the end of the day, this is what it's all about. These faces of these folks sitting at these Formica tables with their big ceramic coffee cups, and maybe a cigarette. What is it about the human condition, as opposed to all kinds of other things? People photograph nature, they photograph all kinds of wonderful things, that draws you to this aspect of photography?
I think I do search out the communities that form of these things. So, for example, the last time I went to Coney Island to photograph Holomoid, it was also it was Easter, and it was a Muslim holiday, and all these groups just came together in this same place, and it was just fascinating to me. And Jewish communities that I photographed that have come together in the pandemic. Observance outside, shofar blowing outside, that created communities. I hope that that's a theme that's over, is an umbrella to all my work that I've done, because I think that's an important thing that photography can do, showing people together and coexisting.
Well, Kibbitz and Nosh, When We All Met at Dubrow's Cafeteria by Marcia Bricker Halperin, is available online wherever you purchase books. And you can learn more about her projects, exhibits, and other work at marciabricker.com. Marcia, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for taking us down memory lane, photographically speaking, and for being with us. Wishing you much continued success.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you again to photographer and photojournalist Marcia Bricker Halperin, and to you for watching this conversation with B'nai B'rith. Now, if you enjoyed the interview, subscribe to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and like us on Facebook for all of our latest content. And be sure to visit the b'naibrith.org website to learn more about our important work. For my guest, Marcia Bricker Halperin, I'm Dan Mariaschin. See you again next time. Take care, everyone.